Hello, everyone. My name is Autumn Yates. I am a Spanish teacher and the World Language Department head at the Langley School in McLean, Virginia. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about using engaging storytelling in a distance learning environment or potentially even in a hybrid learning environment, given the uncertainty of what is coming next in the fall. So I had a couple of objectives that I had in mind when I was putting these activities together. I wanted to show you some twists to some popular and engaging class activities that many of us already do in a normal learning environment. These are just different variations that I have created or that I've sourced from other colleagues that take those super fun, engaging activities and make them doable in a distance learning environment or in a hybrid environment. I also wanted to provide activities that could be done synchronously and asynchronously. So I have a couple that I've divided my presentation, and so you'll see some synchronous activities, some asynchronous activities. Many of them can be adapted for both types of environments. So you could be creative there and see how to vary them back and forth. And then also I wanted to show how these activities could be used in other contexts as well, not just within storytelling. So I'll try to offer some suggestions and tips as I move through the presentation. So first of all, storytelling with some synchronous class activities. These are activities that I have tried during this past period of distance learning that I plan on incorporating in the fall as well. And I am going to start with Four Corners because this was probably my students' favorite game that we played during our distance learning time. This is a variation on what many of us already do in class. So for this variation, I had my students take 4 different pieces of paper and write a word from a grid that I projected onto each of their pieces of paper. In this circumstance, I have selected 4 topic words connected to vocabulary that are going to show up in a story that you'll see in a moment. You can certainly do this in a variety of different ways. Perhaps you're focusing on 4 specific vocabulary words that you want the kids to learn, and you can write those words down. Maybe you have them draw a picture of a little scene, and all of your clues will be related to those words. But for my example, I thought this would be the easiest way to go. So you have the students put a word in one corner of each of the room that they're standing in, and then you instruct them to go and stand in one of those corners, and you read out a sentence. If the student is standing in the corner that your sentence best relates to, they get 0 points. But if they're standing in a corner with a topic that is unrelated to your sentence, they earn a point. And the reason for doing it that way is it increases the likelihood that students will earn points throughout the round. They have a 75% chance of earning points this way. So if, for example, if I say something like, I have yogurt and cereal for breakfast every morning, that would clearly be a sentence that would go in the food category. And if a student is standing next to the word sports, for example, they would not give themselves they would be able to give themselves a point for their answer, for standing in the correct spot. These obviously would all be in the target language. I'm just showing you in English so that everybody understands the rules and knows how to adapt it to the respective language that they're teaching. Now, if you have a hybrid environment where you have some students at home and some students in the classroom, your students at home can play the way that I just suggested. For students in the classroom, you can post one of these words in each corner in your room or on a different wall in your room, and you can ask that your students stand up and simply face the word that they are choosing as their corner for this round. And I would run through the round. I would run through about 8 different sentences in the round. And it's a great way to review past vocabulary and activate some prior knowledge ahead of seeing that vocabulary in the context of a story or some other resource. So once we have played that, you can move into a running dictation. Obviously, these activities can also be used in isolation and within the context of other lessons as well. So a lot of us use running dictations in the regular classroom. We divide our students into teams and we have them running back and forth with different people in their teams, sharing the information as they go from a particular picture or from sentences on the wall. This variation is a little bit different. So what I have done is I've called first, if the students are at home, I've had them put a piece of paper and a pencil in another room of their house, a room that they could easily get to, but not the room that they are currently in. And I would call out a sentence and they would have to write the sentence down, and then run back and request the next sentence by either typing dos or two in the chat or by unmuting themselves and requesting the number out loud. And what happens is you've got this crazy sense of activity where people are running back and forth and calling out different numbers. And for my students and for myself, it sort of invoked that chaos and that excitement that happens in the classroom when everyone is engaged in the same activity. So that was a really fun way to share the different steps of a story. And you can certainly do this in a distance learning classroom too. Perhaps the students are required to be sitting on the floor in their space where they're writing, and they can't ask for the next sentence from you until they finish writing that sentence, and then they stand up and ask you, and then they can sit back down and write what you said. So that's not so much a running dictation as a sitting and standing dictation, but that is a variation. If you've got some kids at home and some kids at school, you can have everybody playing the game at the same time. And you'll see here, I have a variety of sentences. Now, the way I've played in the past is I have I've given the students sentences in order that connect and tell a story. And you can also do this with song lyrics. You can do this with text from an authentic resource. So there's a variety of different places that you can pull from for your running dictation. But here you'll see that I actually decided to do a variation where the sentences are out of order. And we will see why in the next step. But before I get there, I did want to mention that this version of a running dictation is something that I grabbed from a comment by a woman named Señorita Gatti from Senora Chase's blog. So I've got the link to the blog right there. And I just wanted to give credit to the person who came up with this activity within the context of the way that I chose to play with my students. So moving on, once you've done the running dictation, you can actually have the students sort out the sentences into a logical order. So you can see I've done that here. I would not project these, just like I wouldn't project the sentences ahead of time during the running dictation until the students are all done. But the students can take the opportunity to work out the sentences and the order that is most logical to them. And it could be that some students come up with different answers. In some circumstances, I think it's great that there are different ways to put the sentences in order, as long as the students can logically explain why they have chosen to put the sentences in a particular order. If it makes sense to them and if they're demonstrating their comprehension of the language, I think that's great. But so here we have the students sorting the sentences. This is something very easily that could be done both at home and within the classroom. And once we have the sentences of the story in order, you can play either Pictionary or charades. So in this case, I would project the sentences, whether on my screen or on the board, depending on whether I've got students at home, in the classroom, or both. And you want them to be big and easy to read and isolated and separate enough from each other so that the students can really zero in on one sentence. And so for Pictionary, what I would do is I would give them 2 or 3 minutes and ask them to pick one sentence and draw a picture that represents that sentence to the best of their ability. And then if they're at home, once those 3 sentences are up, I would give the students turns to show their picture. And what I would do is I would pin their video so that they would get nice and big on the screen, and they would hold up their picture so that their classmates could see it. And if the students were at home, I would give them the opportunity to race to type in the sentence that is depicted in the illustration. So it was kind of a race against the clock to see who could be the first person to answer the question. Obviously, if you've got students in the classroom, you could be calling on people. You could maybe have them have little cards in front of them with the different numbers on them, and maybe they have to look and pick the correct number and hold it up in the air so everybody's participating at the same time. But that is just a fun way to further review the different sentences and their vocabulary, and make sure the students understand each component of the story. Another variation of that is charades, which is probably not that difficult to figure out. Instead of having the students draw a sentence, you would have students take turns picking a sentence to act out. And again, if they're at home, you can pin their video and everybody could watch them acting it out. If they're in the classroom, you can potentially have them stand up so it's easier for people to focus on who is doing the action. So those are just a few examples of some fun storytelling activities that you can do during your synchronous live lessons, whether you are at school with a hybrid group or at home teaching remotely. And now I'd like to take that same story and show some different activities that we can do asynchronously. All of these activities can also be done in the classroom or in a hybrid learning environment, but I liked the flexibility with these, where if you are in a position where you have to provide self-paced work for a couple of lessons a week, these types of activities work really well for that. So first of all, taboo with story vocabulary. Again, I wanted to give credit to where I got this activity. Dr. Meg Dowdy on Twitter suggested this to me when I put out an all call about a month ago for everybody's favorite distance learning games. And I thought this was a really fun variation of taboo. So what I did was I took vocabulary from the story. And again, obviously this would be in the target language in my classroom. But I listed it here as a word bank, and you can do as many or as few as you want. I think it's helpful to have some variation so students have several to pick from. And then I also gave some sentence starters. And these are wonderful sentence starters because it really gets the students practicing the concept of circumlocution, which is obviously a skill that we want them all to have. So I have, for example, here, it's something that, it's a person who, it's a place where. And when I played this with my students, I had them in the target language. So the students had some good sentence starters to choose from when they were playing. And so when they were ready, they logged into a flip grid that I created, and they watched my video where I did an example where I selected one of these words. And then I said a sentence about the word without including the word itself. So maybe I said something along the lines of, it's something that I need to play a lot of different sports. And then obviously the answer would be ball. Or it's something that I use to go from home to school. And then the answer might be car. It's a person who lives in my house and has the same mom as me. And the answer would be brother. So the students would each make their own short little clip similar to my own. And then at some point in time, you can either that same day, or you can assign it as a different activity on a different day. You have the students log in and watch their classmates' videos and post response videos where they guess which word their classmates are describing. So you actually have a little bit of interpersonal communication happening there, even though it's happening asynchronously. This activity was very popular with my students, and I like I said, that it's something that you can spread out over a couple of different days if you choose to do it that way. Another activity that went over well with my students was clip art comic strips. And so what I would do is I would put a comic strip like this into a Google slideshow, and then I would assign it on Google Classrooms, and I would make a copy for each student. So every student has their own editable slideshow. And then the students would see this when they opened it. And what you can do then, what you have them do, is you can search for images that best tell, search for images that best tell the story. So in this case, for example, it says here, Ryan wakes up at 8 a.m. on Saturday. So maybe I type wakes up and I look for an image that might work. And sometimes typing wakes up clip art yields better results. So here we've got somebody getting up out of bed. So this might be a good one that we could include. Okay, but I see that they're waking up at a different time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that clock out of my image. And then I can search for the correct time that my character wakes up with another image. So if I can type 8 o'clock, and look, there is a clock that says 8 o'clock. And that comes up. And so the students can go through and add little clip art images that represent the different details from the story. You can also have them draw the images. So certainly if you have students in class, you can ask that they draw the images out, or you can have them do these clip art storytelling as well. For your students at home, if you've got some artists, you could encourage them to draw pictures and take a picture to share with you rather than doing clip art if that's something that they would prefer. Another variation on this is emojifying the text. So giving the students the body of the text and asking them to replace a certain number of words with little emojis. That's an idea that I got from Samara Spielberg on one of the presentations she shared on Twitter. So that's another way that you can go about doing some fun storytelling with pictures. Another activity that's very easy to assign remotely is to give the students the story and ask them to change it, ask them to create a new story. So if you've got some really high-level thinkers, you can give them minimal instructions and tell them to be as creative and unique as they want. For students who need a little more scaffolding, you can provide them with the story with the highlighted text that you want them to change. So they know exactly what details that they need to change. And the great thing about doing this is once this is done, you have however many students in your class you have, that's how many unique, different new versions of the story there are. And then you can do so many activities with those once you're all back together. You can talk about the differences. You can have the students change it to first person and describe how similar or different they are from the character, whether or not those sentences are true for them and how they would need to change the details to make them true. So there's a wide, you can go back and you can play, you can do a running dictation with these. I mean, there's so many different things you can do with the individual student story retells. And then you can also move into some collaborative storytelling. Now, what you see here is something that I actually did during a live class. So I'll walk you through that first, but then I'll tell you an idea I had for how it might work better in an asynchronous environment. So synchronously, what I did was I shared a Google Doc with all of my students in the class, and they each had a box, and their box had their name in it. And they were first instructed to write a sentence, an opening sentence, where they they create a character. So they had to come up with, whether it was a person or an object or an animal, and give it a name. And then once they had, and they were welcome to describe it as well. Once they had done that, they had to move to the next box and add some information about that person's character. And so maybe they send that person's character somewhere. Maybe that person's character does something different than what happened in the original class story. Maybe they do something very similar. So you can adjust the parameters as you see fit, giving them as much or as little flexibility as you want with this activity. So this was a fun thing that we did in a live class, but then I thought, it would be great to have an asynchronous way of doing this. And I came up with the idea of using Padlet. So you have each student start a story in their own comment on Padlet. And then once they've done that, you can instruct them to go through and maybe select 5 students to write a second sentence for each of those students' stories. And again, this is something that can easily be spread out over a number of days. Maybe you have them on one day, you have them log in and write a sentence on 5 student comments, and then maybe the next day you have them do the same thing on different students' stories. And that gives them the opportunity to play with different languages, to take the stories in different directions. And it gives, it allows for longer stories, because by the time you're done with this, you can have a pretty decent story about each character, and you could encourage the original students to go back to their original story and wrap it up with a few final details and a conclusion sentence. So that's a great way to have students take what they have been practicing in the story that you've been doing in class and really be creative with it and go in lots of different directions and tell their own story. So those are just a few ideas that I have for how to use storytelling in the classroom. Again, these activities can be done not just in connection to stories. You can break down authentic resources to make them more manageable and really work with the language in those. You can do this with song lyrics. You can have the students help you create a story from the start and use their own words. So there's so many different ways that you can adapt and change the different activities in this presentation, whether that be in a synchronous, an asynchronous, or a hybrid environment. So hopefully you got some ideas for some tips and games that you thought would be fun and helpful and things that you can use in the fall in your classrooms. If you have any questions about the activities that I mentioned, feel free to contact me. Here is my professional email address, ayates@langley.school.org. You are also welcome to follow me on Twitter, where I have posted different ideas and activities for things we've done during the distance learning environment, and obviously before in the regular classroom setting. And then finally, on Pinterest, you can follow me as well. One of the other things I'm very passionate about is using authentic resources in my classroom. And so when you go to my Pinterest page, you'll see a variety of different boards that are divided up by the thematic units that my department uses, and within each of those boards you will find many authentic resources. My guess is about 90% of the resources on there are probably authentic resources, so hopefully you can find some things that you can pull from there. But thank you for listening. Please, like I said, reach out, share your versions of some of these activities or other things you do with storytelling, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you and have a great day.